So thank you for joining us today for this presentation on the remarkable achievements of sculptor Evelyn Beatrice Longman, the only female student and assistant in the studio of Daniel Chester French. The two artists shared a close professional and personal relationship, which is documented in letters and photographs. This talk will highlight the many intersections and cross-currents between their works, including the exquisite Slocum Memorial in Forest Hill Cemetery. Our speaker, Dana Pilson, is a curatorial researcher at Chesterwood. She recently published the article, Write at Large on the Wall, the sculptors Evelyn Beatrice Longman and Daniel Chester French in the June 2021 issue of Fine Art Connoisseur. And she also curated an accompanying online exhibition accessible through the Chesterwood's website. The Q&A function is available on the bottom right of your screen. If you have questions for Dana, please use the Q&A to input them, and you can do that at any time, and we will take the questions and answers when Dana has finished speaking. So I'd like to hand it over to you. Thank you and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie, for your help. And thank you, Gretchen, for inviting me to give this talk today. So let me just share my screen and we can get started. Okay, this will just take a second. There we go. Well, again, welcome everyone. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Gretchen, for inviting me to talk about Evelyn Beatrice Longman and Daniel Chester French on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. As Charlie mentioned, I did recently write an article about Longman and French for Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. As I was writing the article, I realized I really just couldn't do justice to the connection between the two artists in just a few pages. So I created an online exhibition that is available through Chesterwood's website to further explore their relationship as illustrated by objects in Chesterwood's collection and photographs in the Chesterwood archives, which are now at Chapin Library at Williams College. I hope this talk will take things even further. Through the beauty of our digital age, we can compare and contrast works by both sculptors and continue to think about their influence upon each other. For, as you will see, I hope, it is more than simply a case of master and protege. The relationship was mutually beneficial, and it played out in their correspondence, as well as in the objects they created. Evelyn Beatrice Longman was born on a farm in Winchester, Ohio, a tiny town along the southern border of the state. She was born in 1874, the same year that French's first public commission, his monumental Minuteman, was dedicated with great fanfare in Concord, Massachusetts. One of 6 children, Longman's early years were difficult and unhappy, and at the age of 14, she left school to work in a dry goods store. 5 years later, at the age of 19, she visited the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, where attractions ranged from the very first Ferris wheel to a multinational Midway plaisance. The Central Fairgrounds featured a court of honor with classicizing white plaster buildings surrounding a grand basin. At the center stood French's colossal statue of the Republic, an allegorical figure representing the United States. And I show you on the right a picture of the Republic, and on the left, Daniel Chester French in his studio in Chicago working on the head, and it shows you just how monumental this work was. Also to be admired by fairgoers were works by other sculptors of the day: Carl Bitter, Frederick McMonnies, Alexander Proctor, and Augustus St. Gaudens, as well as works by female sculptors working under Chicago artist Laredo Taft. These female sculptors were dubbed White Rabbits for their collective ability to nimbly ascend and descend the necessary ladders, all the while covered in plastered dust. And this photo shows you these so-called white rabbits. The term white rabbits may also have been coined by the architect of the fair, Daniel Burnham. Laredo Taft had been working on the architectural adornments for the World's Fair buildings, but as opening day grew near, he realized that he would not be able to complete the decorations in time. Since all the male sculptors he had in mind, like Daniel Chester French, were employed elsewhere, he asked Burnham if he could use female assistants, which was unheard of at that time. Burnham's reply was that Taft could hire anyone, even white rabbits, if they could get the work done. So Taft brought in his many qualified female students from the Art Institute of Chicago, and they were thereby known as the White Rabbits. Longman viewed all of this sculpture by men and women inside the buildings, as well as adorning the great public spaces outdoors. And it prompted her to say to herself, I could do such things if I had the chance. So she wanted to be a white rabbit too, or perhaps she was thinking that she would rather be on the playing field with all the male sculptors. After attending college in Michigan for a year, she sent photos of some of her clay models to Laredo Taft, due to his reputation for working with female sculptors. He liked her work and arranged a job for Longman to help her pay tuition, and she came to Chicago to study anatomy, drawing, and sculpture at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she earned her diploma for a 4-year course of study in only 2 years. She then decided to go to New York and arrived in the city with about $40 in her pocket, along with letters of recommendation. She found work in the studios of Herman Atkins McNeil and Isidore Conti, who were working on commissions for the upcoming Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. And she moved into a studio at 11 East 14th Street. And I show you 2 works by Isidore Conti that were exhibited at the Pan American Exposition. We don't know for sure if Longman worked on these particular works, but I just wanted to show you these 2. By this time, Daniel Chester French's career was in full swing, and although he used few assistants to begin with and hadn't ever employed a woman, Longman went to his New York studio in December 1900. Luckily, she had a letter of introduction from French's brother, William Merchant Richardson French, the director of the Art Institute of Chicago and a friend of Laredo Taft. French's wife, Mary, later recalled, Evelyn Longman wore a gray hat with a curling feather down over her ear, which, with the dark eyes beneath, took Mr. French's eyes, quite as much as the reputation she had already acquired as to talent. At the time, French was working on bronze doors for the Boston Public Library and was struggling with the lettering, so he asked Longman to take over the task. She did it beautifully and stayed on to do more, wrote French's daughter Margaret in her biography of her father, Journey into Fame. Thus began French and Longman's work together, which evolved into a mutually beneficial professional relationship, as well as a deep and long-lasting personal friendship. Longman would become French's only female studio assistant, as well as a beloved member of the extended French family. French invited her to come to Chesterwood, his summer estate in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and they worked alongside each other in his studio, which you see at the right. They worked together during the summers from 1902 to 1904. Not only did French take Longman under his artistic wing, but she was completely enveloped into the social fabric of Chesterwood, going on picnics and boat rides and enjoying evenings of charades and music in the studio. Estranged from her own family, Longman was considered a second daughter, and she was like a sister to French's young daughter, Margaret. Here, you can see Longman seated on a hillside. She's the one looking right at the camera after a picnic at Chesterwood. And Daniel Chester French is tucked in right behind her. You can see him with his hands clasped around his knees. As she started out, Longman found willing subjects among the French family and modeled portraits of French's daughter, Margaret, and his niece, Louise. Longman later recalled, one day when I was at work, French came in. I was doing the bust of Louise French and said, make the concaves bigger, write it large on the wall. That moment, I think I saw real sculpture for the first time, and my work changed from that moment, technically. French treasured Longman's portrait of Margaret, which is at left, and displayed it on a mantle in his New York City townhouse and later in the hallway at Chesterwood. As chairman of the Metropolitan Museum's Committee on Sculpture, he later orchestrated the loan of Louise, which you see at right, for the museum's 1918 exhibition of American sculpture, and in 1920 oversaw the purchase of the portrait directly from Longman. And if you visit the Metropolitan Museum in New York, you can see this work in the Luce Study Center. A few years later, Longman made a second portrait of Margaret French, now a young adult, likening her to a bacchante, a follower of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine and pleasure. The metaphor was apt, as Margaret was at the center of the Stockbridge social scene. She attracted throngs of young people to visit and hosted lively dinners, dances, and costume parties. For this portrait, Longman adopted an active and realistic style to successfully capture Margaret's vibrant and fun-loving spirit. In 1928, Longman gave French a bronze version of the Bacchante, to which he replied, "I am quite overpowered by the splendor of your gift. And also, I am very much delighted. You know how much I've always admired the head, both as a triumph in sculpture and as a charming transcript of Margaret, but I had not aspired to having a bronze of it." And we actually display a bronze, not exactly this version, but there is a bronze Bacchante at Chesterwood in our collections gallery. French employed Longman as a studio assistant. He needed the help as he was working on about 20 different projects during the 3 years she was with him. He also employed other assistants to make plaster casts, prepare armatures, and whatever else was necessary in a busy studio. We don't know exactly on which project she assisted in these early years, but we do know she took care of things like lettering and other various tasks, such as finishing of the wax, as French wrote, on bronze statuettes. In 1904, Longman established her own sculpture studio, and victory for the St. Louis, Louisiana Purchase Exposition marked her large-scale sculpture debut. And I show you a plaster version at the left, probably the working model, and a bronze reduction in the middle, and then a portrait of Longman, and you can see a bronze victory in the back. It was deemed so excellent in invention and technique that it was given the place of honor on the top of the fair's centerpiece building, Festival Hall, and earned her a silver medal. The work was groundbreaking in that it depicted victory as a male. Usually allegorical figures, especially of victory, were female. After this accomplishment, Longman had bronze reductions cast, of which she must have been very proud. And as I mentioned, you can see the figure of victory behind her in this later portrait. In 1912, French oversaw the acquisition of one of the bronze reductions for the Metropolitan Museum, and it is currently on view in the American wing today. French showered Longman with professional encouragement, and in return, he requested her honest advice. The same year as her triumph in St. Louis, he wrote to Longman thanking her for her comments on his commission for Columbia University. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate the kind things you say about my alma mater. It was very sweet of you to reassure me, and I needed it." We don't normally think of the wildly successful French as needing encouragement, but he sought it repeatedly from Longman. Little is known about Longman's 1905 John Ansley Story Memorial in Lowell, Massachusetts. The bronze plaque depicts a heavily shrouded female figure, symbolic of death. She holds her finger to her lips in a gesture of silence. The poppies in her lap symbolize eternal sleep, and from her left hand, you have to look carefully, you'll see a key dangling, which is a symbolic element to unlock the door of heaven. Longman's shrouded figure brings to mind works by French that she certainly knew. The Angel of Death from the Milmore Memorial that you see at the center, as well as his figure of Aaron for the John Boyle O'Reilly Memorial, which many of you might know along the Fenway in Boston. While French's figures are swathed in classical drapery, for whatever reason, not quite sure, Longman has attired her figure in Roman battle garments. And you see it again here. Longman's story memorial might also remind you of the work of French's friend and colleague, Augustus St. Gaudens. His mysterious yet timeless Adams Memorial, installed in Washington, D.C.'s Rock Creek Cemetery in 1891, was commissioned by author Henry Adams as a memorial to his wife, Marion Adams, who had suffered from depression and took her own life. The figure was intended to be ambiguous and androgynous, neither triumphant nor downcast. In a similar way, Longman's story memorial references the mystery of the afterlife without sentimentalizing grief. Auguste Préaut's enigmatic Le Silence, the silence, also features the symbolic gesture of putting a finger to the lips to indicate silence. Found in the Jewish section of Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, the sculpture marks the grave of Jacob Robles, who was born in Haiti and died in Paris, but little else is known about him. An inscription translates from Latin, "There is no darkness and there is no shadow of death." Now, it might be a bit of a stretch to compare these two. I'm not sure if Longman knew of Préaut's work in Père Lachaise in Paris, but there had been an engraving made after the sculpture, and I believe it was published widely, so she might have seen the engraving. Sculptors often borrow motifs and ideas from one another. One interesting instance is Charles Niehouse's World War I memorial for Des Moines, Iowa, which is at the right, which is clearly influenced by a work that I suspect many of you know well, French's earlier Millmore Memorial. And I think you might be surprised and intrigued by this borrowing and adaptation of French's design. And I show it to you just to show you that sculptors are often borrowing bits and pieces from each other, borrowing, copying, adapting. French was so sought after that he was unable to accept every commission that came his way. He generously passed many commissions on to younger colleagues. In 1906, he gave Longman the commission for a memorial to Louisa Wells, a Lowell, Massachusetts mill worker who died in 1886. Longman eagerly accepted the challenge. And although it is said that she carved the 15-foot tall memorial herself in French's studio, it's more likely that she completed a working model in clay, which was then cast in plaster and then sent to a professional marble carver to transfer into marble. But the lore and things I've read seem to say that she carved it herself in French's studio. After the memorial was installed, French reminded the Lowell committee that $2,500 was still owed to Longman. He wrote, "You understand that she gets all the credit for this monument. It has been a great pleasure for me to do what I could to aid and abet her." Dedicated in 1907, the memorial features an exhausted mill girl slumped at lower left, holding a spindle in her hand. And I apologize, this photograph is not the best. As she is comforted by an angel of death. French's later Russell Memorial, which is at right, is similar to Longman's design of a standing angel with her wings cramped into the confines of the surrounding rectangular structure. And instead of a figure at the lower left corner, French includes a stand of poppies, signifiers of the eternal sleep of death. Also under French's supervision, Longman took on the Slocum Memorial, commissioned by the daughter of William H. Slocum, Mary Nichols. French reported to his sister in April 1909 that Miss Longman has been making a life-size figure in relief from my design for a monument. I am to go over it and put my impress on it presently. It is the angel of the darker drink. That's in quotes. French often peppered his letters with quotes from literature, and here he references verses from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. So when that angel of the darker drink at last shall find you by the river brink, and offering his cup, invite your soul forth to your lips to quaff, you shall not shrink. This verse refers to the river of forgetfulness in Greek mythology. Souls crossing over to death, to the underworld, drink from the river of Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. And as you can see, the angel at the left is holding a cup. So that is the cup of holding the water of forgetfulness. Recalling French's Melvin Memorial, the Slocum features a figure cut in shallow relief. Enormous wings surround the angel who peeks out from beneath a heavy shroud. Although the two memorials are similar, Longman's angel is flatter and more flush with the plane of the block, while French's mourning victory seems ready to break free. Her right elbow and hand holding a branch have already broken the plane, with the rest of her seemingly to follow. French kept track of his commissions, expenses, and payments in his account book, which is now in the Chesterwood archives at Williams College. In it, he recorded that the amount of the contract for the Slocum was $6,000, with $2,000 to be paid to EBL, Evelyn Beatrice Longman. From this $6,000 also came payments for carvers, transportation, and other costs incurred, but Longman received the largest proportion. In May 1908, Frank Faxon of Kansas City asked French to sculpt a portrait of his 6-year-old daughter, Frances. Unable to accept the commission, French wrote back, "I really know of no one man or woman in the country who would be likely to give you as satisfactory a result as Miss Longman." A photo from the Chesterwood archives at Wright shows Longman working on the portrait in a temporary studio in the Faxon home. The completed marble portrait is in a private collection, and a tinted plaster is at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, Connecticut. I think you might agree with me, Longman was quite successful in capturing the placid expression of young Frances, as well as her posture, her charming curls, and her slight shoulders. Longman would go on to create many other images of children, including the Youth Eternal Fountain at center, with 3 charming and lifelike toddlers, replete with pudgy bellies and rippling thighs. An allegorical nude titled The Future at left, which won the prize for the best work of art exhibited by a woman at the National Academy of Design's annual exhibition. In 1925, French's efforts to acquire this work for the Metropolitan Museum were rebuffed, and it is now in the collection of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, which I recommend you all go visit. It's an actual recreation of the Parthenon from Greece. At far right is a portrait of a young girl for a memorial to Hollis Burke Frissell, 2nd president of the historically Black Hampton University. French also created many works depicting children, including the charming statue of Adelbert Thayer Alden, which he worked on in Cornish, New Hampshire, while visiting the artist colony established by Augustus St. Gaudens. French's daughter Margaret modeled for the kneeling child for the Clark Memorial at Forest Hill Cemetery, as well as for the newcomer fountain for Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Baltimore, which is at the center. And if you visit Baltimore, I recommend that you go take a look at this work. It's this is my photo. It's absolutely beautiful in this side chapel. Around this time, Longman was selected in a blind competition of 32 entrants to create a set of doors for the chapel of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Although French chaired the selection committee, he had no prior knowledge of Longman's submission, as she would always cover up her model when French visited her studio. And he swore after the award was made, "I did not even recognize Miss Longman's work myself." The donor of the funds for the doors sent Longman to Italy so she could learn more about bronze casting. As she was setting off, French wrote to Longman, "You have earned the right to your enjoyment. You have been the industrious apprentice, and you merit all you have won of honor and fortune and happiness. I have come to lean on you so hard, to trust your judgment about my work, and more than all, your high ideals and aspirations, and your buoyant enthusiasm are such an inspiration to me. Help me as I will try to help you up to the top of Parnassus. Invoking the Greek mountain where the Muses resided, French also admits that not only will he help Longman to the pinnacle, but that he needs her help to reach it as well. French assisted Longman through the final steps of the Annapolis Commission, traveling with her to Rhode Island to inspect the bronze cast. Upon the completion of the doors, French wrote to chapel architect Ernest Flagg that he was impressed by the great beauty of the work that Miss Longman has done. I know of no one else in the country who could have done this work better, if indeed as well. And the photo at left is from the Chesterwood archives. And I just find it sort of interesting and fun to see the tiny little image of Longman compared with the great mass of the bronze door. Longman's time in Italy can be seen in her design for the doors. She references Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling in the central panels. And here you see the Delphic Sibyl for the figure of patriotism. And I think you can see the similarities here. And Michelangelo's prophet, Jeremiah, for the figure representing science. Elsewhere on the doors, she included symbolic ornaments referencing strength, victory, and nautical life. French wrote to his brother in 1909, perhaps countering criticism that stemmed from these similarities with Michelangelo's work. I suppose Miss Longman's figures in the doors does, in a way, recall the Delphic Sibyl, but I have no doubt that it was an unconscious celebration and due to admiration and study of Michelangelo's works. I do not regard it as too close an adaptation. Longman's first collaboration with French had been on the lettering for the bronze doors for the Boston Public Library. With these naval chapel doors, she firmly established her reputation as a professional in her own right, winning a competition against a group of men, judged by men, for a male institution. Longman proved that she was in the same league as her male colleagues. Longman created another set of bronze doors for the library at Wellesley College. Again, she pays tribute to classical sources, a bearded, godlike male figure alongside a loving mother protecting her frightened child. Maternal figures cradling babies would recur in her work, and this one I think is particularly poignant. And at the right is a photograph of Longman working on the doors in her studio. And at the center is a photograph of the finished bronze doors. French was later commissioned to contribute a memorial of Alice Freeman Palmer, president of Wellesley, to the college's chapel, an allegorical representation of alma mater guiding her young student along the path of knowledge. If you go to visit Wellesley, you can view works by both artists in close proximity to each other. In 1912, Longman entered and won an open and anonymous competition for a memorial to Senator William Boyd Allison of Iowa. Her ambitious design included an 8-foot-high marble figure of the Republic, 6 bronze allegorical figures, and a bas-relief portrait of the senator on the base. This would prove to be one of her most high-profile, ambitious, and lucrative commissions. French congratulated her in a letter that read, "Gosh, Eureka, congratulations. Billy be gosh, gall darn, splendid, what a girl you are. So glad I know you. Wait till I catch you alone. Wow, wow, wow. The rest when I recover from the shock." Her seated figure may perhaps remind you of French's alma mater, which I show you at the right. When working in the classical tradition, sculptors often drew upon similar classical and ideal precedents and motifs. They recycled poses, outfits, attributes, and other aspects of their designs. Sculptors often used the same models too. For example, Hetty Anderson, Maurice Hunter, and Audrey Munson were 3 popular models of the day, and they traveled from studio to studio modeling for painters and sculptors. Sculptors often also worked with many of the same architects. who designed settings and architectural surrounds for monuments and memorials. For example, French introduced Longman to architect Henry Bacon. French and Bacon had collaborated on numerous commissions, and Bacon designed the Chesterwood residence and the studio. Bacon was the architect for the Allison Memorial, and for Longman, joining forces with such an eminent architect was important for her career. It would bring her new commissions and prestige. Bacon would later design the Lincoln Memorial, and both French and Longman would work with him on it. Architect Henry Bacon also designed the Court of the Four Seasons for the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco. The centerpiece of the courtyard was Longman's figure of Ceres, and you can see it in gold at left. The French family actually traveled to the Panama Pacific Exposition, as he too, Daniel Chester French, was also exhibiting works such as his Genius of Creation, and plaster model of that is actually still in the studio at Chesterwood. And French's daughter Margaret took the photograph at right. And you can barely see Longman's figure at the bottom. Around this time, French had had great success with a very similar design, his allegorical figure for the Spirit of Life for Saratoga Springs, inspired perhaps by the famous winged victory of Samothrace. French would reprise his striding winged figure for other commissions, including the George Robert White Memorial in Boston's Public Garden, which I suspect many of you know very well. Longman's series could also be seen as reminiscent of the winged victory. A plaster cast of it was in the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Longman might have seen it when she was working with Laredo Taft at the Art Institute there. French and Longman could have been drawing upon the same classical examples as well as playing off of each other's ideas. In October 1914, they stood together in the field below the Chesterwood studio, examining the final working model of French's Spirit of Life, which had been wheeled outdoors on a railroad track. French had written to patron Katrina Trask just days before Longman's visit. The statue is entirely finished in plaster. I still have some work to do on it here and there. He was most likely waiting for Longman's opinion before declaring it complete. Both series and the Spirit of Life combined classical tradition, ideal female forms, and combined with 20th century dynamism. These ideal female forms are set in motion. Both works were well received as well as prized by the sculptors. Building upon the success of Ceres and the Allison Monument, Longman's career really took off. She won a blind competition for a figure for the top of the Western Union Telegraph Building in New York. The details for the competition called for a seated figure of Zeus, but she decided to submit something similar to her successful victory that we saw earlier. French and two other judges chose Longman's proposed design, a 24-foot-high male figure wrapped in electrical cables and grasping lightning bolts. Titled The Spirit of Communication and informally known as Golden Boy, it was a triumph of youthful energy, swirling lines, bravado, and motion. French wrote to fellow judge architect William Wells Bosworth in November 1916 that he considered it to be one of the very best things of the kind I have ever seen. The enormous Golden Boy towered over Lower Manhattan, and this photograph of Longman in her studio at the left gives you an idea of just how large he really was. He towered over Lower Manhattan, where in addition to his watchful duties over the financial district, he was also an actual lightning rod for the building. During the 1930s and 40s, Golden Boy graced the cover of every telephone directory sent to homes across the country. Although Golden Boy had become a Lower Manhattan landmark, he was removed in 1980 and reinstalled in the lobby of AT&T's new Midtown headquarters. After a stop in New Jersey, Golden Boy is now in Dallas, where it anchors the AT&T Discovery District. It's a new shopping and entertainment complex. There he is, sorry. It must be startling to come upon him at eye level when he was intended to be viewed from the bottom of a 29-story building. So I do need to make a pilgrimage to Dallas to take a look at him in person. Longman's Golden Boy reaches for the stars with youthful energy, and French's dying soldier of the Milton War Memorial holds his torch aloft with his last breath. Both sculptors have produced heroic male nudes with strong physiques and allegorical significance. French's doomed soldier recalls Michelangelo's dying slave, while Longman's more joyous Golden Boy is triumphant, recalling Renaissance sculptures of Perseus having slayed Medusa. While Golden Boy's thunderbolts reference the Greek god Zeus, his message is the modern force of electricity. His supercharged, uplifted wings represent the speed and supernatural quality of electricity. French's figure is only partially nude with a conveniently placed bit of drapery. Longman's Golden Boy is actually blatantly nude. A stylized 20th century toga does not hide anything, and the long electrical cable can be seen as an unblushing reference to the virile power of electricity. Longman pushes past what she has learned from her mentor. Younger, bolder, and more adventurous, she has created an image of modernity that became a corporate icon. In June 1916, at work on the commission for the seated Abraham Lincoln for the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., French begged Longman's assistance. Listen to me, I need you and I want you, not because you are a charming lady, but because you are a sculptor. Now, I have sawed Lincoln in two, and I have been trying him with different lengths of body, and I can't decide what is best by myself. In fact, as I have said, I need your critical eye to help me to a decision, and the decision must be made before Monday. As you can see, French leaned heavily upon Longman, and at times, such as here, he seemed to sound quite frantic and desperate. As you can see from the finished seated Lincoln, he was able to work out the proportions just fine. Longman also advised architect Henry Bacon on the design of the memorial and contributed sculpted eagles, I show you one, double wreaths, and inscriptions of Lincoln's speeches to the final work. She accompanied French and Bacon on trips to view the construction, and following the 1922 dedication, she went along to inspect proposed changes to the lighting of the seated Lincoln. French felt badly that she had caught pneumonia after one of the journeys, and he wrote to her in March 1927, although it was a heavy price to pay for it, I hope it will eventually give you some satisfaction to know that you did me so great a service, and that your knowledge and your advice and your thoroughness gave me the backing to get things right. I am afraid that without you, I should have let things go short of perfection. I am sure it will be a source of pleasure too, to have had a hand in saving the life of my statue. That is about what the new lighting has done for it. About this time, French sculpted Immortal Love, which you see at the right, which I can't help but think pays tribute to Longman's earlier L'Amour, itself an homage to Augustus Rodin's well-known Kiss of 1882. L'Amour had been shown at the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's my cat. L'Amour had been shown at the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition, where it had won accolades from the critics for its elevation above blatant eroticism. It showed purity of emotion, tenderness, and fidelity of its poignant pose. Though a nude couple was an uncommon subject for a female artist at the time, Longman's depiction of pure love between man and woman won her praise. French's Immortal Love seems a little less mutual, the overbearing angel ravishing the young woman in an uneven balance of power. Another interesting comparison is between Longman's Benson Family Memorial and Nature, which are the two works at the left, which I don't know their current locations, but They are published in a catalog essay by Marilyn Rabbits from Loomis Chaffee School. And I think it's interesting to compare Longman's Benson Family Memorial and Nature with French's Memory, shown all the way at the right. French had made a small maquette of Memory back in the 1880s, but then he set it aside. He came back to the work in 1909, finally sending it to be carved in marble in 1917. Unfortunately, no letters exist to tell us who might have influenced who here, but I do think it's fun to see the work side by side and to imagine the sculptors possibly responding to each other's works. I really see a lot of back and forth between nature and memory. It would be wonderful to be able to see them in person side by side. In 1924, French recommended Longman to the Hartford City Commission for a memorial honoring Spanish-American war veterans. Perhaps in gratitude, Longman's design seems indebted to French's exuberant spirit of life, as well as to his victory for the 1st Division Memorial from about the same time. And I show you the two side by side. And again, that's Longman on the steps working in her studio. Both works depict strong women signifying triumph with billowing drapery, armored bodices, and active stances, and wings that seem capable of allowing flight. French was effusive in his compliments. He wrote to Longman, "Let me express my enthusiastic approval of the monument. The statue is splendid, full of spirit and go and power." French's 1st Division Memorial is very difficult to see. It is up high on a column in President's Park in Washington, D.C. By contrast, Longman's Spirit of Victory is at ground level, and I recommend a trip to Bushnell Park in Hartford to see it in all of its splendid glory. The most evocative illustration of the close relationship between Longman and French can be seen in the portraits the two sculpted of each other. French's portrait of Longman portrays an attractive young woman. Her eyes are closed, her expression serene and mildly seductive. There is no indication of her being a sculptor. French later gave the marble to Longman as a wedding present, and 2 plaster versions are actually still in Chesterwood's collection. French at first protested Longman's desire to make a portrait relief of him. "Why spend your strength upon rendering me immortal?" he wrote to Longman in July 1924. "Keep it for better things. I protest against your embarking in so elaborate a scheme with me as the basis." Well, as you can see, he finally did acquiesce to posing, and he posed in Longman's studio. The final profile portrait includes bas-relief renderings of some of French's major works. And if you look closely, you might be able to see the seated Lincoln, the Melvin and Millmore memorials, the Minuteman, and even Immortal Love. While French's portrait of Longman lovingly focuses on her facial features and her beauty, Longman's shows French with a modeling tool in his right hand, a clear indication of his profession. He is likened to an enthroned god as he surveys his creations. The two sculptors continued to collaborate on commissions, more as equals, as Longman achieved greater renown. In 1917, they collaborated on the French and British War Commission's medal. The United States had entered World War I and quickly tried to coordinate the war effort with the European allies. The French and British delegations were given a spectacular reception in New York. And as part of the activities, the American Numismatic Society issued this commemorative medal. French designed the front, which you see at left, Victory wearing a helmet decorated with the lilies of France, the oak leaves of Great Britain, and the pine of the United States. Longman designed the reverse, an allegorical group of 3 standing figures, Liberty holding a sword at the far right, greeting figures of Joan of Arc, representing France, and a medieval knight who French likened to King Arthur, representing England. Not quite a collaboration, but on French's suggestion, Longman submitted a design for a companion piece to his earlier alma mater and the student, at Boston's English High School. Upon selecting Longman for the commission, the school director, Walter Downey, wrote to French that her design for service to mankind blends completely with the general spirit of your group. Completed in 1931, Longman's work complements French's as they both exhort students toward a life of honor and achievement. Longman's heroic soldier and exhausted youth provide a counterpoint to French's optimistic student and allegorical alma mater. She holds a shield emblazoned with the words, "Be clean, be courteous, be square." Be clean, be courteous, be square. And here are the two sculpture groups at English High School. And I think you might agree that they do work well together. Estranged from relatives living in the Midwest and Canada, Longman was considered part of the French family. Along with summer visits to Chesterwood, even after she had established her own studio, she attended the French family's annual Christmas Eve dinners in New York, during which poems were recited, songs sung, and gifts exchanged. One year, French penned a verse in her honor. Sweet Evelyn had a flock of geese, or ganders, all in tow, and everywhere that Evelyn went, the ganders went also. Longman loved Christmas with the French family. She later recalled what a festive place it was and how beautifully French and Peggy decorated the studio and the big table. In 1919, Longman became the first woman sculptor elected to full membership in the prestigious National Academy of Design. French had backed her candidacy and had solicited the support of others as well. Around this time, Longman was hired by Nathaniel Batchelder, headmaster of the Loomis Institute, now Loomis Chaffee School in Windsor, Connecticut, to sculpt a memorial to his late wife. He had seen Longman's L'Amour, which spoke to him of commitment, tenderness, and ideal love. He tracked her down, and during the consultations for the memorial, the two fell in love and were soon engaged. In October of 1919, Margaret French wrote to her own future husband, Penn Cresson, "Beatrice Longman was here with her fiance. She is so happy, and he really seemed pure gold. It is such fun planning the details of her wedding. It will be up here at Chesterwood, as she has no family in this part of the world." Her wedding was held in June of the following year. French and his wife issued the invitations, hosted the event, and Margaret French was actually her maid of honor. And you can see in the wedding photograph at the left, Evelyn and Nathaniel on the step, and Margaret is to the left with the feathery hat. French proudly reported to a friend, "Evelyn was married in the little glade in the woods where the stone steps are, just off the garden, and it was the prettiest thing that ever was." After her wedding, Longman built a new studio in Windsor, and much in the style of Chesterwood. She named it Chislehurst on Farmington, so she also gave it sort of a fancy name, and she continued with her sculpture career. In April 1921, returning from abroad, French wrote to Longman that he was crazy to see you, to tell you of the wonderful and foolish things I have done, and to enthuse over your new studio and all the things you will have to show me. And I show you at the left, Longman's studio, and at the right, the piazza out the back of French's Chesterwood studio. By 1929, French was 79 years old, but still accepting commissions here and there. In July of that year, he wrote to Longman to express his thanks to her for saving my life. "Really, I can't tell you how much you helped me with my 5 brothers, not only in specific criticisms and suggestions, but by your approval of my work and your enthusiasm in general, and particularly for my column scheme." Longman provided valuable encouragement when French had encountered difficulty with his design for the Ball Brothers Memorial. As you can see at left, it ultimately included 5 Corinthian columns surrounding an allegorical figure of beneficence, which might remind you of some of the allegorical female figures that we have seen already today, such as Spirit of Life and Longman's series. French continued to update Longman on his work, even as he was nearing the end of his life. In July 1930, he wrote to Longman about his ideal nude figure of Andromeda. Now I am daily expecting from New York an enlargement of Andromeda. Do you recall the sketch? It seems rather absurd for an old thing like me to be making such an ambitious image. And if there were a chance of my ever being younger, I would wait. Arriving at Chesterwood for what would be his last summer, French wrote excitedly to Longman in June 1931. Nothing doing in the studio for the first summer in its history, but Andromeda is expected presently in marble. In July, he cheerily requested, do come over. French worked on Andromeda up until his death that October. In 1945, as Margaret French Cresson was working on her biography of her father, Longman sent along a package of French's letters prefaced with her own thoughts. He saw so clearly what was good in both the work and character of his fellow men that his own beautiful soul magnified it. French and Longman's sculpture and correspondence detail a platonic love story. He addressed her as La mia cara scultrice, my dear sculptress, and called her a dear and a jewel and a treasure and everything that's nice. She admitted to Margaret that she found him godlike. Longman died in 1954, not quite 80 years old. It is said that her husband scattered her ashes at Chesterwood, which would be fitting if it were true. I just don't know for sure. Longman had arrived at French's doorstep, a penniless young artist, and emerged as one of the nation's foremost sculptors, following not in his footsteps, but alongside her mentor, colleague, and friend. It's likely that neither would have met with as much success if they hadn't had each other. Looking at their sculptures side by side, we see that theirs is truly a story of collaboration, trust, mutual support, respect, and love. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed learning about Evelyn Beatrice Longman and Daniel Chester French. Come visit us at Chesterwood this summer, and please see the Chesterwood website for all things, information about opening hours, special events, membership opportunities, plus we have a number of online exhibitions in addition to the one about French and Longman. There are lots of other things for you to explore on the website. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana, for that fascinating presentation. I want to remind our attendees that they can use the Q&A function at the bottom right of their screen to ask questions. And we have a few here in already. And I'll start with Daniel Chester French was from Concord, Mass. Did Evelyn ever visit or have any involvement there?
That's a really good question. Not that I know of. She did later in life, unfortunately, I couldn't tell you everything about her. Later in life, she did spend a lot of time in Cape Cod. So it's possible that she spent time in Boston and perhaps visited French's, where French had done so much work in Concord. Perhaps she was curious to see the Minuteman and of course the Melvin Memorial. And of course, it's where he's buried. And French's daughter, Margaret, carved the gravestone. But I don't know for sure. That's a really good question, and I would be interested to find out myself. But I imagine you would think that she would have wanted to go see where he spent so much time and where he's buried. But I don't know for sure.
Next question, where is the Milton sculpture?
The Milton sculpture is in Milton, Massachusetts. So it's a suburb, I think, southwest of Boston. And I have not seen it in person just yet, but it's on my list for my next visit to Boston coming up actually next week. So it is in Milton, Massachusetts, and I believe it's quite easily found. I don't think it's too hidden.
In the photograph of Longman working in her studio on the Hartford Spirit of Victory, it looks like there's a drawing standing on an easel that serves as a study for one of the monument's reliefs. Are there any drawings by Longman extant? And if so, where are they? And are they sketches or finished studies?
Wow, that is an excellent question. And I know that there are drawings by French, and they are in the Chesterwood archives at Williams. Longman's archives are at Loomis Chaffee School in Windsor, Connecticut. And if you look online, there's actually a lot of information at the Loomis Chaffee School. I think we were going to share the link with everybody. And I believe that if there were drawings, there are also letters and other things from her studio and her lifetime are all, I believe, at Loomis Chaffee. So another great question. I have to admit that my focus is on Daniel Chester French, and Longman is sort of a side focus. And there are scholars currently working on Evelyn Beatrice Longman, and I could certainly put the person with this question in touch with the scholar who I know is working on Longman. And I would imagine that she would be able to answer the question much better than I can. So yeah, if you would like to get in touch with me following this presentation, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the scholar.
Is Longman's studio available for public tours?
You know, I think it used to be, and I think it was at one time. I don't know if right now with COVID, if you can go see anything at Loomis Chaffee. But I remember meeting someone a number of years ago at a sculpture conference who was from Connecticut, maybe even from Windsor, and had said, you should really come down and see Evelyn Longman's studio. So again, I think if you check the Loomis Chaffee website, that has a lot more information about Longman, you might be able to find out if the studio can be visited. I apologize for my cat. He's the one that upset the PowerPoint earlier in the in the presentation.
Do you know of any plans to have an exhibition of Longman's work in the United States in the near future?
Oh, wouldn't that be great? No, I don't. The best you can do if you're interested is to sort of follow a trail of her works. And many of them are on view. Like I said, a number of her works are on view at the Met. A lot of her works are on public view, like the one in Hartford. There's actually another work by her in Hartford that I didn't get a chance to show called The Craftsman. And I don't know of anything in particular in the works, but I think she would, it's a great idea. I think she would make a great subject for an exhibition. Chesterwood is currently working with the St. Gaudens National Historic Site on a traveling exhibition of the works of French and St. Gaudens. And we are focusing a section on their studio assistants and students. And there will be, I believe there will be works by the studio assistants and students in the exhibition, including a work by Longman, as far as I know. But I don't know of any comprehensive exhibition of her work.
Who painted the beautiful portrait of Longman and where is it located?
The one I showed at the very end, I should have mentioned it. It probably went by too quickly for you to read, or maybe you were looking around at the other slides. It is by an artist named Milton Bancroft, and Bancroft was actually a mutual friend of both Longman and French, and he painted a number of oil portraits of Longman, and there's an oil portrait of French at Chesterwood, and the pastel that I showed you at the end, which is I think what you were referring to, is actually in Chesterwood's collection, and there is a reproduction that can be viewed in the Chesterwood residence, and the actual pastel is at Williams College, safely stored away because pastels are very delicate. The earlier portrait of Longman with the image of the little bronze of Victory, I believe that someone at Loomis Chaffee should know because I snagged that from the Loomis Chaffee website. So I think they would know. And there are other portraits by Bancroft of Longman. Bancroft also, of course, I can't tell you everything when we zip through all the material so quickly, But Milton Bancroft painted, he contributed paintings to the Court of the Seasons that I showed you from the San Francisco exposition that had been designed, the courtyard had been designed by Henry Bacon. Longman had done the Ceres statue, and Milton Bancroft had done the paintings in that courtyard. So that's probably a much longer answer than you had anticipated.
Are there other works of Longman in Mass or New York State?
That's a good question. I know that her portrait of Margaret French, the Bacchante, the one that I showed second, is in a number of different collections. And I believe it's in, I can't remember if it's in Buffalo or there's one up in upstate New York. I know there's also one at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I think there are other works by her in Connecticut, and I think there are more works by her in Hartford specifically. Also at Loomis Chaffee, she did a number of, there are many of her works at Loomis Chaffee as well, including, I think, a version of that fountain that had the three sort of chubby children. It's called the Heckscher Fountain. And I think the final fountain is on Long Island, but there is also a version at Loomis Chaffee.
Did Longman face any discrimination as a female sculptor, not giving her as much credit for her work as some other female sculptors face?
I can imagine, yes. I mean, there's probably a reason why everybody knows Daniel Chester French, but not everybody knows Evelyn Beatrice Longman. I think having French in her corner really helped her, but yeah, just think, you know, she's not a household name, although I think many of us would probably argue now that that she really should be. So yes, I can imagine. Also, even thinking back to that when I was talking about the white rabbits, and it's sort of fun and, you know, kind of fun to think about them, but as you can see, you know, women weren't really taken seriously. It was often thought that their work was more sentimental. Even French's daughter was a sculptor, and she often did portraits of young children. So she wasn't doing monumental works. Longman was doing monumental works, and so I think she actually did garner more of a reputation than some female sculptors who were sort of doing sort of smaller scale works. That's a good question. I don't really know.
Thanks. So I think this will be the last question for today.
Oh, great, because these are really challenging questions, and it's very exciting to try and answer them.
Any works of French or Longman at the Munson Williams Museum in Utica?
Gosh, you know, I have an enormous document on my computer of where all of French's works are, both in on public view as well as in different museums. But not that I know of. That does not ring a bell. But if I can certainly check and get back to you. Tempted to check right now, but I don't want to risk that. But I can't quite remember having seen that anything was there. Perhaps a viewer is watching from Utica right now and curious.
So when we put the video of today's presentation up on our website, we can add supplemental material in the comments as part of that. So.
Great. And I think I had mentioned to Gretchen that I'm happy to share my email address at Chesterwood. These were all fantastic questions, and sometimes I don't have the answer in here, but I have it in our voluminous files that are right behind me at work. And I love to go digging in our files and finding the answers for people. And we do get lots and lots of questions about French and sculpture in general. So I'm happy to share my email address, and people are, oh, great, there it is. And people are certainly welcome to shoot me a note and I will do my best to answer questions or put you in touch with someone who can better answer the question.
And if folks don't jot down your email address before we close the session today, they can write to you care of the Chesterwood website.
Yeah, actually just go on the Chesterwood website and I believe our contact information is there. I think,
Right.
I think all of our emails are listed as far as I can tell.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you on behalf of all the people that were here today. It was a fantastic presentation. We're going to close, but before we do, I just wanted to remind people of the next program that the Historical Society is sponsoring. It's going to be entitled Uncovering the Clues to Your Old House's History, Saturday, March 19th at 2:00 p.m. If you own an old house, you may have questions about its history, who's lived there, or how it's changed over time. You may be wondering how to bring back or enhance its best qualities, learn how to research the history of your house, and uncover clues about how old houses are frequently modified over time and how to reveal their best features. So this is a free talk. It's going to be virtual. And if you go to the jphs.org website, under events, you can register there. We hope to see you soon at that presentation or one of the many others that we have coming up, as well as our walking tours that will start with the warm weather. So thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Dana, and see you all soon.